What if I told you that the most accurate prophetess of the 20th century had a vision about the most controversial leader in American history? What if I told you that Baba Vanga, the blind psychic who predicted impossible events decades before they happened, saw something about Donald Trump that will change the fate of America forever? What you're about to hear isn't political speculation. It isn't partisan opinion. It's the vision of a woman who never got the big things wrong. The woman who predicted 9/11, the woman who predicted the fall of empires, the woman who saw the future as if she were reading an open book. And now, researchers have discovered references in her prophecies that point directly to America and its leader, to Donald J. Trump. Baba Vanga died in 1996. But she left prophecies for the next 1,000 years, coded prophecies, prophecies that only make sense when the events begin to manifest. And now, in 2025, when Trump is preparing to return to power for a second term, when America is at a historic inflection point, Baba Vanga's words about this moment are coming to light. She never mentioned Donald Trump by name, but she spoke about something very specific. She spoke about the man with golden hair who would divide a great nation. She spoke about the leader who would be worshipped like a god by some and hated like a demon by others. She spoke about the one who would return to power after great fall and disgrace. And when you put all the pieces together, when you analyze her words with current context, it's impossible not to see that she was talking about America, about Trump. Baba Vanga said this leader would come to power for the second time in a time of unprecedented division, that his return would mark not a new beginning, but the beginning of the end of an era. That his second term would be the most dangerous, the most chaotic, and potentially the last of American democracy as we know it. And the most unsettling thing is what Baba Vanga saw about this man's destiny. She said he would face three great threats, three forces that would test not just his leadership, but his very survival. And depending on how he responded to these threats, America would follow one of two paths. A path toward authoritarian transformation, or a path toward violent resistance and potential civil conflict. The first threat, according to Baba Vanga, would come from within his own body. She spoke about the leader whose mind would remain sharp, but whose vessel would fail, about the body betraying ambition, about the king falling not by enemy's sword, but by enemy within his own flesh. Trump is the oldest president to ever take office for a second term. He's shown signs of cognitive decline, unusual speech patterns, confusion, and Baba Vanga saw this worsening dramatically. She saw serious health problems emerging during his second term, problems that couldn't be hidden from the public, problems that would force those around him to make terrible decisions about who really holds power. She described seeing the leader unable to complete sentences, saw handlers managing him like a puppet, saw the true power residing not with the president, but with those who controlled access to him, and saw America being led not by the man in the office, but by shadowy figures behind the throne. Figures the American people never elected. Baba Vanga also saw something darker. She saw those around the leader benefiting from his weakness, saw people who would prefer him incapacitated because they could control him better, and saw the danger of a president who was president in name only, while others made decisions in his name. Decisions that could lead to war, to economic collapse, to the end of American democracy. The second threat Baba Vanga predicted would come from the people themselves. She spoke about a nation so divided it could no longer stand, about brother turning against brother with weapons in hand, about cities burning while the leader watched from his golden tower. America is more divided now than at any time since the Civil War. And Baba Vanga saw this division exploding into actual violence during Trump's second term. Not just protests, not just riots, but organized armed conflict, Militias in the streets, citizens fighting citizens, blood being spilled over ideology. She described seeing cities in chaos, saw federal troops being deployed against American citizens, saw states threatening secession, saw the concept of United States becoming a cruel joke, and saw the leader, instead of trying to heal the divide, pouring gasoline on the fire, using division as a tool, weaponizing hate to maintain power and distract from his failures. And Baba Vanga saw specific flashpoints. She saw a contested election, but not the presidential one. She saw midterm elections in 2026 being so disputed, so contested, so clearly manipulated, that millions of Americans would simply refuse to accept the results. And this refusal would trigger a cascade of events that would bring America to the brink. The third threat, the most dangerous according to Baba Vanga, would come from Trump's own actions. She spoke about the leader who would destroy himself through hubris, about the king who would tear down the pillars of the temple while standing inside it, about the one who could not stop even when the abyss opened beneath his feet. Baba Vanga saw Trump making decisions that would have catastrophic consequences. She saw him attacking institutions that were the foundation of American democracy, the courts, the press, the electoral system itself. She saw him surrounding himself with sycophants and yes-men while purging anyone who would tell him hard truths. And she saw this creating a feedback loop of increasingly extreme decisions. She described seeing Trump ordering actions that his own military would refuse to carry out, saw him demanding things that were clearly illegal, clearly unconstitutional, and saw the moment when the American system would face its ultimate test. What happens when a president refuses to follow the law and has enough support that enforcing the law against him could trigger civil war? But Baba Vanga didn't see just threats. She also saw two possible futures, two timelines depending on choices made. In the first future, the dark future that disturbed her most deeply, she saw Trump completing his transformation of America, saw democratic institutions being dismantled one by one, saw courts being packed with loyalists, saw the press being silenced through intimidation and legal warfare, saw elections becoming theater where outcomes were predetermined. In this future, Baba Vanga saw America becoming what the founders feared most, an elected dictatorship. A system where votes were still cast but no longer mattered, where opposition was still technically legal but practically impossible, where the appearance of democracy remained but the substance had rotted away. She described seeing protests being crushed with overwhelming force, saw dissenters being arrested on fabricated charges, saw the FBI and Justice Department being used as weapons against political enemies, saw America becoming a cautionary tale for the rest of the world about what happens when a democracy fails to defend itself against authoritarianism. And she saw Trump in this future, old and deteriorating, propped up as figurehead while others ruled in his name. Saw him being used even in decline because his personality cult was too valuable to discard. Saw America trapped in a grotesque puppet show where everyone knew the emperor had no clothes, but saying so had become dangerous. But Baba Vanga also saw the second future, the future of resistance. And this one frightened her almost as much as the first. In this future, she saw Americans refusing to accept authoritarian rule, saw massive civil disobedience, saw states refusing to enforce federal laws they considered unconstitutional, saw the military splitting, with some units following Trump and others refusing his orders, saw America fragmenting not cleanly but messily, violently, tragically. She described seeing a second civil war, not like the first one with clear battle lines and uniformed armies, but a chaotic insurgency, urban warfare, neighbor against neighbor. A war where the front line was everywhere and nowhere, where you couldn't tell friend from enemy, where trust became impossible and paranoia became survival. In this future, Baba Vanga saw American cities becoming war zones, saw supply chains collapsing, saw millions fleeing to Canada, Mexico, Europe, saw refugees from what was once the most powerful nation on earth, saw the American dream becoming the American nightmare, and saw the world watching in horror as the beacon of democracy consumed itself. And she saw Trump in this future too, saw him defiant to the end, refusing to compromise, refusing to step back, convinced of his own righteousness even as everything crumbled around him, saw him eventually being removed from power, but at such cost that the victory would feel like defeat. So what determines which future manifests? Baba Vanga was clear on three factors. First, the institutions. If American institutions, the courts, the military, the bureaucracy, the press, hold firm against unconstitutional orders, if they remember their oath is to the Constitution, not to any individual, then the worst can be avoided. But if they bend, if they rationalize, if they choose career over principle, then the slide into authoritarianism becomes inevitable. Second, the people. Baba Vanga saw that Americans had become complacent, had taken democracy for granted, had forgotten that freedom requires eternal vigilance. She said that if Americans woke up, if they engaged, if they defended their institutions and their rights, then democracy could survive. But if they remained passive spectators while their country was dismantled, then they would wake up one day to find it was too late. And third, Trump himself. Baba Vanga saw two versions of Trump. In one version, age and declining health would mellow him, would make him reflect on legacy, would make him want to be remembered as uniter rather than divider, would make him pull back from the most extreme actions. But in the other version, declining health would make him more paranoid, more extreme, more willing to burn everything down rather than face accountability. And which version manifested would determine everything. But Baba Vanga also left clues about timing. She said the period between January and August of 2026 would be absolutely critical. That during these months, all three threats would reach their peak. That decisions made in this period would determine which future would manifest. We're in 2025 now. Trump's second term has just begun. The critical months are approaching, and every choice he makes, every decision the American people make, is shaping which of Baba Vanga's two visions becomes reality. The blind prophetess also made a personal prediction about Trump. She said this man had the ambition of Caesar, but the wisdom of a child. That his greatest strength was his ability to connect with people's anger and fear, his talent for speaking simple truths in a complex world. But she warned that this same simplicity made him dangerous, made him unable to understand the consequences of his actions until it was too late. And Baba Vanga saw a specific moment, a decision point. She said there would come a day, probably in mid-2026, when Trump would face a choice between maintaining power through increasingly authoritarian means or stepping back and allowing the system to function as designed. And his choice in that moment would echo through history. She described seeing him in a room surrounded by advisors, some telling him to go further, to seize more power, to crush opposition completely. Others, the few remaining voices of reason, begging him to step back before it's too late. And she saw the moment of decision on his face, saw him choosing, and saw that choice determining whether America survived as a democracy. But she also saw something else, something that surprised her. She saw that even in the darkest timeline, even in the future where Trump succeeded in consolidating power, his victory would be temporary. She saw that authoritarianism built on personality cult doesn't survive the death of the personality. And she saw Trump's age, his declining health, meaning that even if he won, he wouldn't have long to enjoy it. She described seeing the post-Trump America And in the authoritarian timeline, she saw chaos, saw his would-be successors fighting each other, saw the coalition he built fracturing without his unique ability to hold it together, saw America potentially emerging from authoritarianism, but scarred, damaged, weakened, no longer the superpower it once was. And in the resistance timeline, she saw America emerging stronger but smaller, saw the experience of fighting for democracy creating a generation that would never take it for granted again, saw institutions being reformed, saw safeguards being strengthened, saw the country learning painful lessons about the fragility of freedom, but also saw the cost, saw the dead, saw the trauma, saw families divided forever by the conflict. Baba Vanga also made predictions about international implications. She said America's crisis would create a power vacuum globally, saw China filling that vacuum in one timeline, saw a new Cold War in another, saw the entire world order that had existed since World War II collapsing because the keystone of that order, American power and stability, had crumbled. She described seeing allies who had depended on America for protection scrambling to arm themselves, saw nuclear proliferation as countries that once sheltered under the American nuclear umbrella realized they were on their own, saw regional conflicts exploding without American power to restrain them, and saw the 21st century becoming far darker and more dangerous than it might have been. And she saw Trump's role in all this, saw him as the catalyst, the match that lit the fuse, not necessarily intending all the destruction that followed, but causing it nonetheless through combination of ambition, ego, and inability to see beyond the immediate moment. But Baba Vanga left a final message, a warning and a hope. She said the man with golden hair was both threat and test, a test of American democracy. A test of whether the system the founders created could survive a leader who didn't believe in that system, who saw democratic norms as obstacles rather than guardrails. She said if America passed this test, if it survived Trump and what he represented, then democracy worldwide would be strengthened. Other nations would see that democracy, when defended by vigilant citizens, could survive even the most determined assault. But if America failed the test, if it succumbed to authoritarianism or tore itself apart trying to resist it, then democracy everywhere would be endangered. Because if it could happen in America, it could happen anywhere. Baba Vanga's vision for Donald Trump is both prophecy and challenge. It shows two paths, two possible futures, both real, both possible. And it says the choices made in the next year and a half will determine which becomes reality. America is at a decisive moment. It has reached a point where the very nature of the country is being decided. Will it remain a democracy? Will it slide into authoritarianism? Or will it tear itself apart in conflict between these visions? And at the center of it all is one man. One 78-year-old man with declining health, enormous ego, and unprecedented power. And Baba Vanga saw it all, saw it decades before it happened, and left her visions as a gift, as a warning, as a map to navigate what's coming. And now it's up to Trump and all Americans to decide what to do with that map. Will they follow the path toward authoritarian darkness? Will they choose the path of resistance and potential civil conflict, or will they find a third way that Baba Vanga didn't clearly see, a way to navigate between these extremes and emerge intact? Only time will tell. But Baba Vanga's words are there, clear, precise, waiting to be heard, waiting to guide those with wisdom to listen. The blind prophetess saw America's future, saw its moment of greatest test, and saw that everything depends on one man and the choices he makes. The destiny of hundreds of millions hangs in the balance. And Baba Vanga's visions show us exactly what's at stake. If this video left you speechless, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone who also needs to know this truth.